Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to NEWSROOM. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Tuesday, the 30th of November, 2021, the last day of the 11th month of the year. And these are the stories that we'll be talking about during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the nuclear power meetings, power deal meetings, in fact, the JCPOA meetings that have begun between Iran and the P5+1 minus, of course, the United States of America, since it opted out of these meetings. Nevertheless, the Iranian negotiator is quite optimistic as far as the outcome of these talks are concerned. On the same hand, the United Kingdom does not want Iran and has said that it will work flat out to stop Iran from becoming any form of nuclear power, and it wants it to remain under certain preconditions as far as this nuclear deal is concerned. Also, Israel is pressurizing the world powers so that Iran does not come back to that JCPOA. This is our first story, ladies and gentlemen. Our second story of the day concerns the extraordinary meeting of the foreign ministers of the Organization of Islamic Countries that has been called by Pakistan, and Pakistan has said that it is ready to host this extraordinary meeting. Of course, this extraordinary meeting is on the prevailing situation in Afghanistan, the humanitarian crisis, the economic crisis that is engulfing and has engulfed, in fact, Afghanistan as we speak. The United States still hasn't unfrozen its assets that are present in its country, and that is leading to a lot of issues. A lot of people are going without proper food, without proper shelter, and with the winter that is there in Afghanistan, with the temperatures reaching to minus degrees, below zero. This creates a lot of havoc for people in Afghanistan, including the government. Our third segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the World Health Organization that has called for the Omicron coronavirus variant as a high risk and a threat of infection that surges across the globe. There are a lot of concerns that the World Health Organization chief has also laid out as far as the Omicron variant is concerned. We know that a lot of countries have also put on certain barriers as far as the in-flights are concerned from the African countries, but South Africa is the country that is bearing the brunt of it all as we speak. Our last story, ladies and gentlemen, is concerning Twitter, whose co-founder Jack Dorsey is going to leave the company when his contract expires in 2022, and he's going to be replaced by the CTO, that is the Chief Technological Officer, Parag Agrawal, because of certain issues that the members of the committee of Twitter had as far as Jack Dorsey is concerned. Let's begin with our first story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns, of course, the 2015 nuclear deal that was signed between Iran, P5+1. The deal was then, of course, had to be stalled because of the US coming out of it in Donald Trump's era, and then, of course, Joe Biden pledged that he's going to bring the US back into this fold. In this whole scenario, there is the meeting that is being held between the powers that be and Iran. More in the following report.
The unraveling of Iran nuclear deal and resultant extremely belligerent stance adopted by Western powers and Islamic Republic of Iran exhibited colossal setback for multilateralism. After dramatic escalation of tensions, the silver lining is that Islamic Republic and Western powers have finally resumed long-awaited talks in Vienna, started from November 29, about reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. In their attempt to rejuvenate Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran and the P4+1, China, France, the United Kingdom, Russia and Germany have already headed to Austrian capital, while the US, which unilaterally abandoned the nuclear deal in 2018 and imposed sanctions on Iran, is participating indirectly. In order to set the pace of talks, several informal meetings, including a trilateral meeting between Iran, China and Russia, were held. The talks are expected to be complicated as new Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi's administration is pressing US to lift all sanctions and guarantee to not renege on deal this time. In a statement following the talks, Iran's top negotiator Ali Bagheri Khani criticized maximum pressure strategy and ensured the participants that Iran is serious about reaching a fair agreement that would secure Iran's legitimate interests. The US maintains that it is prepared to lift sanctions inconsistent with the accord, indicating that some of the human rights and terrorism sanctions imposed over the past 3 years will remain in place. Regional players, such as members of Gulf Cooperation Council, have welcomed the restoration of the nuclear deal, but Israel is undermining the negotiations. Days before these talks, the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, gave updated estimates of Iran's uranium stockpile and reported that Iran has boosted its stocks of enriched uranium.
Dr. Farah, foreign affairs expert who also works as the assistant professor at NUST, joins us online. Dr. Saiba, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saiba, now that the talks are going on in Vienna between Iran and the important countries, of course, the US is also participating indirectly. How optimistic do you feel Iran should be of the outcome of the talks?
Thank you, Omar, for the question. In diplomacy, it is usually said that no agreement is better than a bad agreement. So I think Iran is very much clear on what has been happening to it in the past when the agreement was signed among all these countries, and then how the US unilaterally withdraw from the agreement, and then Biden administration is really working on reinstalling the same agreement. So I don't think so Iran will be very positive and optimistic about this entire arrangement that is happening now, because the sanctions are not only coming from the US but from the UN as well, and they're quite harsh, and it could be considered as a welcoming sign in diplomatic terms, but I don't see any fruits coming ahead, because America is really, by whatever it is doing in Afghanistan, by unfreezing the assets and all, I think America is showcasing that it is very hard towards, and I think posing and placing itself very hard in the global politics these days.
Right,
so
Dr. Farah, let's talk about the US. Let's talk about Joe Biden. Do you remember very well he had said that the US wants to return to the JCPOA and to the nuclear deal, and it wants this to be a positive outcome as far as the Iranian nuclear deal is concerned. Of course, now we are hearing that there are certain preconditions that the US has, especially when it comes to certain sanctions that it wants Iran to continue being under. Do you feel Iran will accept it if the US goes forward and the other countries comply with the US's demand?
I think Iran will only agree if it is in the best interest of Iran. I think by this time, if you look at the entire arrangements, whatever is happening now, it's after the change of leadership. So on the face of it, it looks like that America is testing ground that what tills the current leadership will have in terms of the nuclear capability and enriching its resources and all. If for Iran, it is quite challenging. And I think for the US, it could be for certain objectives to achieve. And the objectives could be to engage Iran in giving way in relaxation of the sanctions that America is promising to them. But I don't see the promising getting fulfilled in the future. And through these kind of negotiations and all, I think America is one more time trying to access the Iran nuclear sites, and by investigating through the IAEA inspections and all, which I think they have been doing even in the past. But this time, probably through these negotiations, a new room could be opened for further investigations and making America fully understanding of the situation, that whether Iran is enriching its resources or not, the nuclear ones. And another thing could be to stop Iran from further enriching beyond 20% of the uranium stockpiles. That is their key area. And to gain access to sensitive nuclear sites in Iran for further intelligence-based operation by Israel and other Western powers to degrade Iran's technological capabilities.
You mentioned Israel. I mean, Dr. Farah, let's talk about Israel as well. It is trying its level best so that these talks are not a success. Do you feel that Iran will succeed as far as its pressure tactics are concerned on the powers that be? Because we know that the European Union is quite adamant as far as some kind of an optimistic result is concerned. The EU's negotiator Enrique Mora also sounded optimistic after the meeting. How do you see the influence of Israel?
Israel is quite influential. If somebody deny it in global politics, I think that they will be living in fool's paradise. We know what sort of influence Israel is having even in American politics and worldwide. So Iran being a direct threat to Israel would do anything to bring Iran to its terms. And I think this rivalry will continue for decades and centuries, probably. So the entire game is becoming very important based on the change in the leadership in Iran and the rule of the EU and all. I think nobody can do anything unless the powerful states like America being the superpower of the world and Israel being an immediate effective in the Iran becoming a nuclear power, they will never ever let Iran develop it, and they will put more and more sanctions on Iran to acquire nuclear capability. Along with that, Umar, the frozen assets of Iran, which is really affecting the economic prosperity and development of Iran, trade and all. I think that is really affecting Iran's progress in terms of they are not able to have trade relations with other partners in the region and across, even in EU. And those who ever want to open up any kind of trade context with Iran, they also have to face the same sanctions that Iran is facing in terms of the US sanctions on Iran. So only those states can stand with Iran in terms of trade relationship and partnership who can stand the wrath of Israel and America.
All
So
right. Now, Dr.
it's
Farahnas,
challenging.
there's another angle to it all as well. We've talked about Israel, but Israel is also pressurizing the other countries. It has met with the Britishers and the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, after meeting with her Israeli counterpart, made the statement, and I quote, she said that Britain will work flat out to prevent the Iranian regime from gaining nuclear weapons. We are absolutely determined to prevent Iran from securing a nuclear weapon. Why the apprehensions that Iran is securing a nuclear weapon? Hasn't Iran said time and again that its uranium enrichment is for peaceful purposes? What is your take on that?
Well, if they agree on that Iran is really using its nuclear enrichment for peaceful purposes, the war will end here. And there won't be any further, objective left behind that when and how America is going to investigate and inspect the Iranian the nuclear sites. So the game will be over. So they don't want the game to over. They want to keep it open and alive for all the time. So they have a chance to go and to inspect all the sites of Iran, and through that they will also put sanctions on Iran to control them in terms of economic affairs and in terms of trade and oil and all of that. If they accept that Iran is right and they are using it for peaceful purposes, then it would kill the purpose. That's what they are not ready to do. So in this situation, I think Iran should, if they are, I'm not quite sure because I have not inspected their sites myself, but according to the IAEA reports and all the inspections teams who were returning from Iran nuclear sites, they say that they are not building up a nuclear weapon, but they are using it for peaceful purposes. This is what they are saying. So based on that, Iran should stick to its stance and not move beyond that. And it should work towards improving its relationship with the world. And for that, it has to work closely with the United States in terms of unfreezing its assets and removing the sanctions, because they living in global politics and global world, you have to interact with one another because we are depending on each other in terms of states. So,
but at the end of the day, Dr. Farahnas, where does that leave Iran? I mean, to be very frank, Iran has been pushing for this deal to restart, and after a couple of years, now there is that real inclination for some kind of outcome to this meeting. Now we understand also that there are certain powers that do not want any outcome for it. But generally, when Iran says it's quite optimistic about the outcome, it wants a fair deal and expects a fair deal. Do you think it will ever get a fair deal?
I don't think so. There's going to be any fair deal. We have recently seen whatever fair deal America had in terms of AUKUS, in terms of the Quad, and even the recent arrangement in which America really upset France. I think that sets loud and clear examples that America will do whatever is in the best interest of America, irrespective of other states' interest, and it could be even at the cost of other states' interest. And in case particularly of Iran, where almost for more than 10 years, when the IAEA, they are always and always saying and sharing that Iran nuclear facilities and sites are all for peaceful purposes, but still the sanctions are in place there. And America just signed the agreement with them even in the past, and then they moved from the agreement unilaterally without caring about what sort of agreement they have signed and what were the other partnering countries there. So America do whatever is in their best interest. This is how global politics looks like these
That
days.
is what
Nobody
global
knows.
politics looks like, Dr. Farahnas, but we really hope that despite the way you see global politics and many others see global politics, let's hope that sanity prevails and finally some kind of a deal is achieved between Iran and the powers that be, and this nuclear deal goes forward. It's in the interest of all the nations, whether it be the West, whether it be Iran. Let's remain optimistic. I am, at least for one, quite positive of the outcome. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much, Dr. Farah Naz,
Thank
the
you.
foreign affairs expert and also assistant professor at NUST, to have joined us. Let's go to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and our second story concerns the extraordinary meeting of the foreign ministers of the OIC that it has been called, and Pakistan has offered to host this meeting. This is a statement that has come from Shami Qureshi Sahab, our foreign minister. More in the following report.
The unilateral American sanctions upon interim Taliban government since the collapse of Western-backed government has plunged the country into unprecedented economic turmoil. The war-ravaged country stands at the brink of harrowing humanitarian crisis as more than half of the country's population is now facing food security and a lack of other basic services, while nearly $9.5 billion of its assets were frozen by the US, triggering a banking crisis. The bleak humanitarian situation has been exacerbated by a winter necessitating a fundamental shift in the international community's approach towards Afghan government. Since explosion of Afghanistan's human tragedy will have destabilized spillover effects, Pakistan, as a responsible region, has offered to host the extraordinary session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation convened by Saudi Arabia. In order to craft a joint framework for immediate humanitarian response, Saudi Arabia has called on OIC to immediately convene an extraordinary ministerial meeting on the situation in Afghanistan on the 17th of December. The main agenda of this meeting would be to craft a mechanism to deliver aid to Afghans, coordinate procedures with the relevant UN agencies and international institutions to dilute the humanitarian impact of the country's economic crisis upon beleaguered civilians. Aid groups, experts and the UN has persistently warned that international sanctions on the Taliban have led to the collapse of the aid-dependent economy and call for explicit humanitarian exemptions for the delivery of aid to prevent a catastrophe. Only a unified international response can address what World Food Programme Director David Beasley has referred to as the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, with 23 million people heading towards starvation.
Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador, joins us online to discuss this issue. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saab, the humanitarian and the economic crisis in Afghanistan is something that we all know, or the world entirely knows about what is happening. How important is it for bodies such as the OIC to get together to find a solution?
Well, it's extremely important because OIC in its charter, the Article 9 and 10, that covers such extraordinary meetings to cater for the immediate needs of the members. And I must underscore that Afghanistan is one of the founding members of OIC. So they deserve to be really taken seriously at the time once there is a very serious humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. I'm glad that Pakistan has already offered hosting this OIC conference, ministerial conference in our country. And that should address many points which has already been touched upon by the international organization. Half of our population is having scarcity of food, and if it's not really catered for, there is going to be a catastrophe.
But Dr. Saab, you know, the catastrophe is already there. There are a lot of people who are still, there are people who have sold off their children. This is the reports that we are hearing. People are almost dying of hunger. There's not enough food, enough water to feed their kids. In all of this scenario, Dr. Saab, why do you feel there is such a strange behavior coming from the West, especially the United States, as far as unfreezing the Afghan assets is concerned, or the aid reaching to Afghanistan in time is concerned?
Basically, the entire world, they are pressing upon one or two fundamental sets of problems. and those are basically that emanates from Doha Agreement. And they are still insisting on Afghanistan to implement some of those points, like women rights, like children rights, like education for the children, the all-inclusive government, and soil not to be moved by the terrorist groups in there, and drugs not to be smuggled. So all those points are basically unverifiable. The Taliban have really this time shown their resolve to address all these points, but they definitely need some time. And from that angle, as you said, that the catastrophe has already started. People have started dying. The babies are being sold. The food organization, the World Food Director, has already cried. Has already is crying to deliver the food aid to Afghanistan. So and other UN organization too. But your question is very significant as to why the world is not really two reasons for it. Number one, that the US has a financial system. I spoke with certain UN organizational heads, and they were finding it very difficult to transfer money into Afghanistan to assist Afghani people and to get the aid to the needy people over there. And why? Because the financial system of US controls all the banking system, and the money was not, whatever was available, in fact, 1 billion, which was pledged, out of which there are about 500-600 million is available with the UN, but they were finding a difficulty. Now, very recently, about a week or 10 days ago, they were able to push some money into Afghanistan to pay the salaries. That was one reason. Second reason was the internal pressure of United States, the pressure of the people, because there's so much of criticism on Biden administration, that the kind of withdrawal and all what we've been discussing earlier. So because of which the US is trying to just impose those points, and is trying to impose those points which is not even warranted, and because of which its allies also are having difficulty in sending the aid. But now that
Dr. Jamil, I'd like to ask you a very simple question. With all sincerity, what is more important? That the Afghans comply with the preconditions that the West or the US has put them, or that they starve to death before? I fail to understand why certain preconditions are more important than the lives of the Afghanis.
No, it's just a pressure tactics by the West, and the pressure, not only West, but more importantly, US, and for the reason I just illustrated to you. And that's really something which is very inhuman. You understand that. I've been working for United Nations. I know what are the values of certain countries and to what extent they can go. So this extent, what we are seeing, the history has seldom witnessed this kind of extent, where the US and its allies are going so far as the humanitarian assistance is concerned. What to talk of humanitarian assistance, but it's their own assets. Afghans' own assets are not being released, and that's really multiplying the whole adverse situation in Afghanistan.
In all of the scenario that you've explained to us, and of course we all know that as well, what is the role of the OIC, and how important does that role become?
Oh my goodness, OIC, if they put their foot down, it's known as the regional organization, and it's regional organization of 57 member countries. It's a complete bloc, and the regional organization has its value in the United Nations Charter. And according to United Nations Charter, the whole bloc can move resolution in this and pressurize Security Council and call for a General Assembly meeting, pass resolutions, which could be non-binding and binding as well. So 57 countries, once they call for and once they ask and pass the resolution, and also move to Security Council and General Assembly, that could mount a tremendous pressure on the countries who are not really releasing those assets and also releasing those humanitarian funds. But Pakistan, within its own given resources, Pakistan is doing its best. They've sent just 2 containers yesterday, containers of medicines, drugs, and it's over 100 million. And Pakistan is lobbying for Afghanistan, even in consultation and coordination of the neighboring countries. My only reservation is that the neighboring countries, the way they could have geared up more, although China is sending some aid, but they could have sent much more than what they are sending. Your fundamental question about the OIC definitely would mount on the international community, and I feel that it can ease out some of the problems of Afghanistan and its humanitarian issues.
All right. Now, putting aside the OIC as well, Pakistan's role cannot be denied. You yourself said that 2 containers have just been sent yesterday, and the amount of aid that Pakistan has sent is quite significant. Top of talk that Pakistan is putting out across the world on different fora as far as giving the necessary aid to Afghanistan is concerned. Do you feel that the Pakistani efforts will will reap their benefits in due time before it is too late?
You're breaking, but what I could understood, yes, Pakistan definitely is providing the immediate and the life-saving kind of a relief, which I think Afghan people would definitely remember. We have already sent them this much of relief. The food relief we have sent it a couple of days ago. In fact, in September, $148 million worth of various sector projects we implemented, including education, health, and infrastructure. And an additional about 221 million are in execution. 3,000 scholarships we have already doled out to the Afghan students. So this is what Pakistan could do it under these circumstances, where the drug manufacturers authorities.
All right. Dr.
Really
Jamil,
doing their best to help them out. And
Dr. Jamil, also Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who has asked for Pakistan to host this extraordinary meeting of the Foreign Ministers, Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC, also talked about a couple of apprehensions that Pakistan had if the aid does not come in the right time for the people of Afghanistan. There's a lot of internal turmoil that could that could come out as a result of this economic and humanitarian crisis, and there are so many other issues. There were 4 important points, whether it be migration, whether it be terrorism, whether it be the inflation and internal turmoil, crisis within the country is concerned. Do you feel that the other countries across the world understand these repercussions of what could happen in Afghanistan?
Unfortunately, the other countries in the world who are across the Atlantic, mostly they don't realize until the problem starts knocking their door. My own understanding and my own analysis that the world community, including United States, would not leave Afghanistan to get totally destabilized. Because if that happens, I've worked in Somalia, I've worked in Kenya, and I know what happens and how that territory is utilized by the terrorist groups, and it becomes uncontrollable. But for now, it's a pressure tactic to me, and to my understanding, it's a pressure tactic, and they are trying to assert maximum pressure to get their points through, and at the cost of the humanitarian aid and at the cost of the life of the people who are dying every passing day. So from that angle, I feel that the apprehension about the drug smuggling, the apprehension about the terrorist activities, the apprehension about the migrations and the refugees, Pakistan could be the first victim, and Pakistan probably would not be able to stop the flood of refugees under Geneva Convention 1951. So all these factors these are the possibilities, and Pakistan is worried about it. Yeah.
All right, final question, Dr. Jamil Saab. You talked about the Afghans succumbing to these pressure tactics. The Afghans have not succumbed in the 20 years that the US was there, or even before that when the Russians were there. Do you feel that they will succumb under the pressure tactic, or do you feel they will starve but not succumb? What's your take on that?
I think it would not be possible once Afghan Taliban are in the government. Once they are having the reins of the government, it's not possible. I've seen revolutions and followed by the government in East Timor, and I personally know Shalana Gozmao, who was the freedom fighter along with his team and along with his people, and later on became president. So after taking the responsibility of the country, it becomes altogether a different ballgame. And you have seen how different are this Taliban from the Taliban of 90s. So from that angle, Taliban's, I would say, it's not coming. The Taliban is playing their diplomatic role to its maximum level. And Taliban at this stage cannot all of a sudden change the entire system because they have their ranks and file. They don't want to totally turn the ranks and file who have fought for 20 years against the government, against the Taliban government. So they have to strike a balance, and world is not understanding that properly. And they have their own motives. Perhaps they want this region to be controlled, destabilized, so that the CPAC is affected, and there are other projects, if they are affected, then the containment of China and the aim to containment of China could be achieved. So from
let's see, Dr. Jamil, how things move out as far as the coming days are concerned. But the coming days are extremely important as far as this current crisis that Afghanistan is engulfed with is concerned. And of course, the OIC meeting is a right step in this regard. We can only wait and see what results come out of that, what results come out of the different other forms of aid that might or could reach Afghanistan within the next few days. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil Khan Sahab, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this situation in Afghanistan, and of course the extraordinary meeting of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC that Pakistan proposes could be hosted by it on the 17th of next month. Let's go to our next and the last two stories very quickly. The first concerns COVID-19 and the WHO, that has shown a lot of reservations as far as this new variant of COVID-19, that is the Omicron, is concerned. The WHO chief has warned that this variant could pose a high risk of infections or infectious surges across the world. We know that it emanated from South Africa. We also know that a lot of countries have since closed their inbound flights from South Africa. We also know that South Africa is crying foul. We also know that a lot of countries have received patients of this Omicron variant, and we also know that Asad Umar Saab, our minister, has also talked about this variant reaching Pakistan in the next few weeks. We need to brace ourselves, but at the same time we need to be extremely cautious as far as getting ourselves vaccinated and of course following the SOPs are concerned. Nevertheless, on a lighter side, the Merriam Webster dictionary also notes and puts the word vaccine as a 2021 word of the year, because that was the word that was the most searched for in the year 2021. So of course, at the same time, at the one hand, it is a variant that is of extreme concerns. It is a pandemic that is of extreme concern. Hundreds of thousands have perished because of this, and this variant or this pandemic shows no signs of abating. One variant ends, the other variant begins. So we need to be extremely cautious, but at the same time try to live our lives as normally as possible. And our last story, ladies and gentlemen, of the day is about Twitter. Twitter's co-founder Jack Dorsey is to leave the social media company in 2022 when his contract expires. He left a cryptic message some time back on Twitter saying that he loved Twitter, but after that the reports have come out that he's going to be replaced once his tenure ends. And who will replace him? He will be replaced by the chief technological officer of the same company, that is Twitter, Parag Agarwal, and whichever reasons are behind it, whether it be the different members of Twitter's organizing committee that are not happy with the current functioning of Mr. Jack Dorsey, because this was not the only post that he was occupying, or because of other reasons, who knows. And we also do not know how this will go forward as the future of Twitter is concerned. Nevertheless, the shares and the share prices increased around the world in Twitter when this news broke out. So maybe the world is optimistic about this new change as far as Twitter is concerned. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow. New stories, new segments about Pakistan, about the world. Until then, stay safe, follow the protocols and get yourselves vaccinated before it's too late. Allah Hafiz.